Welcome back to the Mainly Fly podcast, where we talk about all things fly fishing and fly tying. Now, today is a little bit of a different episode. I'm going to give some updates about not only this channel, but as well as my other 3 channels, about some changes that have going on in my life lately, and how that's going to impact the channels in a positive way. In addition to that, as I was sitting down today, I was thinking, normally what we do is we go through some questions, some of your guys' questions, and then we start working into the topic of the day. Normally I pick a specific topic and dive a little bit deeper into that. However, today, for whatever reason, I was sitting around just kind of twiddling my thumbs for like 20 minutes, trying to come up with a topic on the spot. So instead of winging it, I kind of decided that I'll just give you guys that update. And I also have a ton of questions from you guys that have been piling up. So those of you who have asked, I'm sure you'll find it quite useful. But first, we're going to start off with some updates. So I don't always talk about my personal life a whole lot on any of my channels. Not necessarily because I don't care to, but rather I like to focus on the content, and I think it's what you guys find most interesting. And especially since everyone's attention span on social media seems to be getting shorter and shorter these days. Although, for those of you guys who are here listening to this podcast, congratulations, as you guys have a larger attention span than just about 95% of my typical audience. And I just thought that you might like to know a little bit about what's going on over the last 6 months that's kind of affected the channel. I've really tried my best to have it not, but over the last couple weeks, I hit some hard burnout. But anyway, enough lead up. So I started this channel, or not this channel, but the Mainly Outdoors brand, I guess you could say, probably about 4 to 5 years ago. And that started with the original YouTube channel. And if you're not aware of that, as most people have come to know me as Mainly Flies, that was called Mainly Outdoors. And if you just put in the YouTube search, Mainly Outdoors, you'll see that I actually produce a lot of fishing and hunting content. So for those of you who enjoy my fly tying videos and always ask, why don't I show videos of me using them, you can actually find me on there. Although I haven't really posted there a whole lot lately for reasons we'll get into. And I decided to start that channel mostly as a hobby. I liked going out and fishing and thought that filming and editing was kind of interesting and a way to involve yourself in the outdoors in a sense after the fact. And so I kind of got into that and really enjoyed it. And basically, the whole Mainly Outdoors brand kind of just built from there. But during that time, I was a graduate student. So I'm a graduate student at the University of Maine. I've been working towards my PhD in biomedical science and engineering, and we'll get into some specifics on that in a minute. And that was generally why I had the time to do it. I work a lot, but I had a flexible schedule. But anyway, that's kind of how this whole thing started. But we'll get into what's been going on over the last 6 months. So I've been really consistent on the Mainly Flies channel, as that's primarily how I make my living, is through the ad revenue from that channel, as well as mostly people supporting the channel through purchasing flies from me. So I couldn't let that one down. But unfortunately, due to time constraints, I had to kind of let the Mainly Outdoors channel go a little bit. Not necessarily for good, but just for the time being, I wasn't able to produce the content that I would like to. And I hope to get back to that soon. So over the last 6 months, I have been writing my thesis for my dissertation for my PhD. And that took an incredible amount of time. Ended up being about 200 pages. And I'll read you the title if anyone cares. So this is very different from the work I've been doing on here. So the title of it is Exploring the Impact of PQN75 and GLH1/VASA on Germline Development, Maintenance, and Germline Stem Cell Reprogramming using C. elegans as a model. So that probably sounds like a whole lot of jargon to most of you, but essentially PQN75 and GLH1 are both proteins that I studied throughout my graduate work, and I used a roundworm as a model to do so. It's just a very simplistic system to study the germline, and if you're confused on germline, germline is not referring to germs as in a cold or something like that. Germline is specifically referring to reproductive organs. And so that's been a whole other side of my life, is studying that, working towards the PhD. So 6 months ago, I was actually given the okay to start writing that thesis, and it's been one of the hardest time periods of my life, mostly because I didn't want to let all my channels go dead, so I even started this podcast during that time. I just couldn't produce as much content as I would have liked. But at the same time, I was producing fly tying videos just about every day, in addition to writing my thesis. So my schedule for 6 months has looked something like this. Mondays, I'd go to the lab and I'd write all day. I'd come home, tie some flies for orders or package stuff. Tuesday would be a video day, so I'd create the videos that I would release weekly with the hopes of reaching a daily basis. Wednesday, I'd go in and write. Thursday, I'd make videos again or a podcast. Friday, I'd go in and write. And then the weekend was dedicated to tying flies that I would turn into videos and edit on Tuesday and Thursday. And also tying flies for orders and packaging those orders on Sunday that would be ready to be shipped on Monday. So that whole time took a lot of dedication, and I haven't really had a break since the start of January. So anyway, that was a really hard process, but I stuck it out. It just took a lot of discipline in order to keep that schedule over the last 6 months. But anyway, thankfully, that dedication paid off. So on June 30th, I defended my thesis and successfully passed. So now I'm essentially the most overqualified fly tyer that you've ever met. But, over the last 6 years, I started to realize that while I enjoy science and I liked researching, but that wasn't necessarily what I had the most passion in and what I enjoyed the most. And what I found I enjoyed the most was through starting this channel, I realized that, fishing, as what I've always viewed it as, was a hobby, but I realized that I could actually make a lifestyle based around it. And I have a lot more passion for that and drive to produce content for everybody over what I was doing in the labs. So essentially, I have my doctorate, but I have no plan to use it at this time. That said, I don't regret what I did. I really do enjoy science and the process that I went through. It was certainly difficult, but I think it will be worthwhile in the long run. I can always go back to it if I choose to, but the way I'm looking at it, it essentially is like the ultimate safety net. So I feel extremely confident in pursuing YouTube and fly tying and fly fishing going forward as my full-time living, which is what I intend to do, mostly because, I do have that doctorate, and now that, to me, that feels like this safety net. So if for whatever reason this doesn't pan out, I can't fall that far. I'll end up just finding a job because I have plenty of skills and unique qualifications that will enable me to easily find a job and a decent paying one. But I would much rather do this for a living, and I just want to take the time to thank you, all of you, for supporting me, whether that's just listening to these podcasts, watching the videos, or picking up some merch and flies. Whatever you do, it's helped to support my lifestyle in some sort of way. And I just want to say thank you. Now, in return, so the good side of all of this is that I'm going to be able to start making a lot more content. So I've had that discipline over the last 6 months. And the best thing is that now I'm going to be able to apply those extra 3 or 4 days that I spent writing on my research directly into growing this channel and all of my channels. So not just this Mainly Flies podcast, but we'll also have more content, or at least continuing the content, because I've been fairly consistent with it on the Mainly Flies channel, where we post just the fly tying videos that you're watching right now. And I'll also start to put up more content on the Mainly Outdoors channel. I'm looking forward to seeing what's to come. I still have to work on publishing my thesis, but that's going to be done within the next couple weeks, and I'll officially graduate August 18th. Which is not long away, and then I'll be moving into this full time. So as far as this channel goes and where I want to take it, we've only made, I think this is the 4th podcast that I've made, so it's still very much in the process of getting the hang of it and where I want to take it. I think we're going to continue with the format I've been doing, just questions and a specific topic. We also might have some guests on from time to time, because I know a lot of you guys are asking specific questions about things that I wouldn't really say is my expertise. I can give some advice on it, like, bass fishing. I just never grew up in where warm water species were, so bass isn't necessarily what I know the most about. I can talk about it, sure. I just went bass fishing with a buddy last week on his drift boat, and it's really a blast. Have no quarrels with bass fishing or anything like that. I'm not a trout purist. It's just I grew up around cold water species and trout, and wherever you grow up, you just become very fond of those species, and I have the most experience in that. But anyway, yeah, so we're going to have some guests on the channel. I think I'm working out a few already and hope to do that in the future. So there's a little update. So anyway, let's get into, I guess, today's topic, which is mostly just focusing on your guys' questions. If you're new to the channel and you want to have your question answered, all you have to do is go down in the comments below, ask your question, and I'll throw it into the next video. And what I would really love from you guys is, since I really struggled with it today, if you can drop some podcast topics in the comments below, that would be extremely helpful, because I really struggled with trying to think of one today for some reason. Either way, I didn't want to let it stop me from making this. Anyway, on to your guys' questions. Now, our first question comes from Mark. And Mark asks, how does one find a consistent or legit in-person class? He doesn't specify for which, but probably fly tying, if I had to guess. Yeah, Mark, so I think the best way to go about this is if you have a local fly shop, that's probably where you should start. Pop in that fly shop and be like, hey, do you guys ever do any fly tying nights where they either do it themselves or they invite a prominent local figure to come in and teach people? So I think your best bet, Mark, if you have that possibility, go in there and ask them. They're either going to do them themselves or they're going to know someone or a place where you can do that. If you mean fly fishing classes, Request asks, what do you use to hold the fly when you're working on them? Yeah, so that's called a vise. And it's basically just a set of jaws that you have a little lever that clamps down on your fly. And so that locks it in place for when I'm working on it. It's if you ever do get into fly tying, that's the first thing you need. You're going to need that and a bobbin. And with that, you can essentially start. A Ghost Clown asked, have you ever stuck yourself accidentally by grabbing a fly? Yes, I've definitely done that, and that's why I often prefer working with barbless flies, mostly because I don't see the difference when fishing. As long as you can keep tension on your fly, you're really not going to lose that fish. And if you do happen to catch yourself on the fly, it doesn't have a barb and it causes pretty much no problem. It's either going to fall out on its own or you can just simply pop it out and you're good to go. I don't hook myself with my flies very often anymore. But the one reason I do love barbless is because if it gets caught on a tree or if it gets caught in clothing or I drop it and it gets stuck in your pants or even in your vehicle, a barbless fly does the same thing. You can just pop it right out, no problem. Versus a barbed fly, if you get that in a piece of clothing, you're going to have a lot of fun. You might as well just pinch it and pull it out. So yeah, I've definitely stuck myself. I work around flies a lot and it happens from time to time, specifically when I'm pushing in the opposite direction. That's when you got to take the most care. Austin asks, I'm new to fly fishing. Can you explain what the different types of flies do? Now that I think about it, this might have been a good topic for the day. But yeah, Austin, so at a basic level, you have nymphs, and nymphs are what you're going to use subsurface. So these are aquatic insects in a larval stage before they exit the water, or maybe they just live there the whole time. They're often weighted, or you add weight to help them sink below the surface. Now, working a little bit up from that, you have wet flies or soft hackles. Wet flies being the older version, and soft hackles are a little more modern, typically using like a partridge or a CDC. What these do is they're typically swung through the current, so you can float them on a nymph rig or under an indicator, but typically what you do is you cast them across the current. They float subsurface, so they're under the water, and then you just swing them across the current, and fish think these are emerging insects. Another type is a streamer. So a streamer is generally a larger fly that's going to imitate a bigger bug or oftentimes some sort of minnow. And this can be stripped through the current in many different ways. It can be swung, it can be dead drifted, it could be stripped really quick. Generally, you're just trying to imitate a bait fish that's escaping from a larger predatory fish. Next, we have a class called dry flies. Now, dry flies are exactly how it sounds. They sit above the water. So these flies are going to be meant to float, or in the case of what I'll often call an emerger, it sits just below the surface of the water. So we want it to sink just slightly, but that's more into the weeds. And dry flies are generally what people think of when you think of fly fishing. So that's what a dry fly is. You're presenting a floating object or a floating fly that's going to sit above the water, and a fish is going to come up and grab it. It's definitely the most recognized in fly fishing and also the most fun to catch fish. But it doesn't always necessarily work because fish often feed on the bugs below the surface. And it's generally not till the warmer periods in the spring and summer where you start to see a lot of insects emerging and going through their full life cycle. So it might not be what you always experience on the water, but it is what every fly fisherman looks forward to most. So in essence, those are the broad categories. Each one of those is broken down into subcategories, and there's even a few other categories that are a little more unique. But if you get into fly fishing, those are the major ones you'd want to know. Let's see. What Cooper Fly Fishes asks, what is your go-to fly on your home waters? So one of my favorites is the golden retriever. It's one of the first videos I posted on my channel. I always use catchy titles, but I think it was named Use This Instead of the Woolly Bugger, or This Fly is Better Than the Woolly Bugger, which, if you've seen my videos, it's kind of a play on words. The fly is essentially a flashy woolly bugger. I'll try to pop it up here if I can find it. But it's a great pattern in our waters, mostly because it mimics the bait fish quite well, but it's also just flashy for the brook trout and the salmon. They like, particularly in the fall, salmon like brighter colors, and brook trout, they're just flat out opportunistic. They don't really care. If they can see it, they'll go for it. But it's got a red underbody with some golden estaz that goes over the top of that, and it uses a gold bead with a prominent red collar. And on the back, you usually have some crystal flash with a marabou tail. So more or less just a crystal woolly bugger. But the pattern itself is called a golden retriever. So I love to use that fly pattern. I'll fish it in white. And I also make a olive version that I really, really like. It actually landed me my largest landlocked salmon ever a couple years ago. You can actually find that on my other channel. I was pumped. That was a beautiful fish. And I know if someone's going to ask how big it was, I don't measure my fish specifically because it doesn't matter to me that much. A big fish is a big fish. But anyway, yeah, so I just wanted to get it back in the water as soon as possible. But that was a cool one. So you can find those fly patterns on my website. Pretty much anything you find on my website is a fly pattern that I have had a fantastic day with. I don't stock my website with hundreds of flies so you can get whatever you want. I just stock it with things that I know work and are gonna work for you guys. So I guess a little plug for myself now that I'm doing this full time. If you don't tie, you can pick up some flies from my website. Of course, just watching these videos helps support me. So if you tie your own, don't worry about it. Just listening to this has helped me out. So anyway, that's my favorite streamer. Some other ones that are close. The Black Ghost, really great one. As far as nymphs go, right now my favorite is a vinyl stonefly. It's one of the most popular flies on my website. That's a cool pattern. It's fun to tie, it's fun to fish, and it's big. So the fish have to be looking for big bugs, but when they are, they really love that pattern just because it's a big ticket meal. It also can be used just as a attractor because they're going to see that. They might not go for it, but it's the weight you need to help get your indicator rig down to the level of the fish. And what that'll do is help you present smaller things like your midge that maybe it doesn't take the stonefly, but instead it's going to go after that midge below it. But I really love nymphs. I go through a lot of different favorites. I just think they're fun to tie, and they're also fun to fish. Not in comparison to a dry fly, but you don't always get to do that. Zach asks, what is the worst/least usable fly pattern? So I thought I saw this question earlier, and I started thinking about it, and my first thought was I'm not going to answer that because I don't want to offend someone who made a fly pattern. And it's also, it depends where you live. One pattern might be useless in my area that works particularly well somewhere else. But one thing did come to mind. I do have a extremely useless pattern on my website, and it's a cheeseburger. I have caught fish on that, and actually I have a video on that on the Mainly Outdoors channel. But yeah, it's a cheeseburger. It's basically all foam. It's got one green feather in it, but it mimics a mini cheeseburger, and I just find it funny. If you were to go into your fly box, I guarantee you there's no such thing as a cheeseburger hatch going on. But on a good day, I've caught plenty of fish. Sometimes I like to break it out and just give myself a challenge. It's also really fun to have in the fly box when someone asks you, which pretty much always happens when you fish a river with people on it. They're, oh, what are the fish biting on today? And I like to just hand them a couple of those and tell them, oh, these have been doing really well, and just walk away. I always get a good laugh out of that. Yeah, I'd say the cheeseburger is definitely useless, but can be fun to give yourself a challenge. Eric Nerf asks, let's talk about strike indicators. I never use them, but I know some swear by them. Yeah, I like strike indicators when I use a nymph rig. I haven't really got too big into Euro nymphing, mostly because I've just never, I don't know anyone who Euro nymphs in my area. No one's ever really taught me, and I haven't cared to teach myself just yet. I have done it a couple times without all the gear. I just kind of made my own rig, but it is effective just doing Euro nymphing. If that's what you use right now, Eric, nothing wrong with that. That works exceptionally well. But yeah, strike indicators, particularly when I'm guiding. We, in fly fishing, if you're not aware, we call them strike indicators, but they're essentially just a bobber. And what you do is you put a single nymph or a couple nymphs under it, depending on your area. It's not always legal to use two. In mine it is, so I usually put a big vinyl stonefly, followed by a smaller nymph, like a zebra midge or something like that. So it works. I think they work really well. They're also great for beginners because you're not casting them like a dry fly. You're just kind of flopping them over. So there's not all that much skill involved in using a strike indicator. You just watch your bobber. If it bobs a little bit or drops, set the hook. It could be a stick, it could be a fish, but either way you set it. So they're very easy to use. They're really easy to teach people how to use it, mostly because they have the concept, or at least everyone's gone bobber fishing in their lifetime. This is a very easy transition to them, where they're just, I tie the flies for them and select them, and then all you have to do is, tell them, hey, flick this forward, there's going to be fish through this run, and if you see that move a little bit or go down, set the hook. So yeah, Eric, if you haven't really got into nymphing, then strike indicators are a simple way to start. Simpler than Euro nymphing, but that's also a extremely effective technique. And if you are an Euro nympher, it's not going to be effective as that because you don't have as direct connection to your flies. So the issue with strike indicators come when you hit really slow flowing current. So a trout, what's going to happen, or a fish, when it comes up to bite your flies, what they're using is they don't have hands. So whether they know it's food or not, they come up and they'll bite it, and they use their mouth as hands, and that tells them whether or not it's real. Now with our flies, they're going to chew on it, but they recognize that, okay, this wasn't actually food, even though it looks like food. And eventually they'll spit it out. That can happen extremely fast. Sometimes it takes them a little bit longer to figure out, depending on the pressure. But anyway, in a slow flowing current, your indicator is moving along at a very slow pace. So when that fish takes your fly, that input might not show on the surface through your indicator right away. It takes it a second or 2 seconds, depending on the flow. And in that time, the fish could actually spit it out. So there is a little bit of skill as far as you can reposition that indicator to sense a bite sooner. But yeah, we won't get into that today. I could probably do a whole topic on that. If you haven't tried them, it's worth a shot. They're super simple. You don't need a whole lot of new gear. Just pick up some indicators, use smaller tippet and 2 nymphs, and you can try out nymphing. Extremely effective technique. The next question from Brandon is, who got you into fly tying? That would be my grandfather. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple years ago, but many of the videos you've seen, I still use his materials. I've got a whole bunch that got passed down to me, and I'm really happy to have them. So his materials are still catching me fish to this day. But yeah, my grandfather was a big fly tyer. He was more of a classic type fly tyer. He did a lot of patterns like the black ghost and gray ghosts. Yeah, he taught me at a pretty young age, and he taught me some of my favorite patterns and bought me a fly tying kit. And so that was kind of the start of my journey. During my teenage years, I didn't have the patience for tying and kind of gave it up, but came back to it in college and have stuck with it ever since. yeah, and that's who got me into it. His name was Bob Rochester. Unfortunately, has passed away now, but was an extreme outdoorsman and has certainly affected and shaped my life to this day, specifically in fly tying. Next question is from Donuts Random Stuff. He asked if I'd be able to make a nice buggy look merch. Yes, that is definitely on my radar. I've wanted to do that for quite a while, but as we talked about earlier, the last 6 months I have been swamped in work and unable to focus on much else. But in my spare time, yes, that is something we'll definitely be doing. So let me know what you'd like to see that on, be it fly boxes, t-shirts, hats, whatever. Definitely stickers, I will do that. But I'm not a graphic designer, so I do need to find someone who can make something that fits the channel and I think will work well. So I will be looking into that, and I will announce when this stuff comes out. If I might do a single run t-shirt, so you'll have to put in your name ahead of time. I'll print them and then ship them out once they come in. But yes, it's going to happen, and there will definitely be stickers on it. I am excited to have that myself, honestly. So our next question is from Kevin. I guess 3 questions. Question 1, what is your favorite fly tying tool? That would be a whip finisher, mostly because I think it's the most useful, and for me, it's a little extra useful. So you can whip finish by hand, but you will never see me doing that in videos. You probably can't see it in most videos, but if you look at my middle finger, which is where I would typically whip finish a fly, I have a small, not a big one, but a small little skin tag. But if I whip finish by hand, the thread gets caught on that, and I've actually had it start bleeding. So yeah, I like the whip finisher, and it's because of an unfortunate little skin tag. What is your least favorite fly tying tool? That's a good question. I don't really have one. I just sat here for a while thinking about it. All fly tying tools are designed and around to make your life easier as a tyer, but I did come up with something. My least favorite fly tying tool is a dull pair of scissors. There's nothing that frustrates me more than when I bend the tip of my scissors or I'm using a dull pair and can't cut something. Yep, that's definitely it. He also asked if I would show my tying setup. Yes, I will. I can show that at some point. Maybe I'll put in a little video here. So if I do put a video, so on what you're looking at now is on the walls, I have soundproofing, and this is how I get the audio to come out cleanly. I have a great microphone that you can see sitting there, but the greatest microphone is not going to help a terrible soundproofed room. If you want good audio, soundproof first, buy your microphone second. I learned that in the opposite order, in case you were wondering from my earlier videos. But besides the point, so yeah, this is my editing station. This is where I do all the podcasts, voiceovers, and edit the videos. I'm working in a really small space. That's why we're looking for a house right now. I'm starting to drown in my work in my office space. I also have this nice shag carpet, which I just find funny. So this also helps with soundproofing and is why I use a shag carpet. And then here, this is my photo booth. This is where I take the thumbnails for the YouTube videos. And then what you're looking at over here, this is my tying setup. It's less than ideal. I'm really excited to have a space I can call my own and truly create a fly creation studio. And I would be happy to share the progression that I go through with that. I think that'd be a lot of fun, and it's going to be a lot more personal than what I have now. What you're looking at is a very functional setup where I can jump between making videos, tying orders, and editing videos without shifting things around. I used to use a single desk, and I'll tell you what, that was awful. I would waste 20 minutes just re-gearing from tying flies to editing a video. So I stole my girlfriend's desk. This was her desk until I claimed it. But yeah, so now I can just hop back and forth. And so anyway, I have all my thread up top. I have some storage bins for material, and there's many more materials spread all throughout this room's in many locations. And then I just have a mess of tools. Yeah, if right now it's not organized. I like aesthetics. I wish it was, and I am very excited to redo this bench in a nicer space. So look forward to that. We'll have a different tying room one day. But for now, this is very functional and it works for me. Next, basic Duro or something like that. What is the largest fish you've caught and where did you catch it? So I don't give specific locations typically. Well, I think I did on this one. This is a really popular river. You can find it on my Mainly Outdoors channel. I actually have it documented. It was caught on my vinyl stonefly. So just another reason I love that pattern. I'm actually looking at it right now. It was a orange variation that I tied to fish for steelhead in New York. You probably all know the river I'm talking about by now. But yeah, again, I didn't measure it. All I know that it was a big fish and definitely the biggest fish I've ever landed on a fly rod to date. I hope that changes one day. I am going for bull trout. This August, actually, I'm going to go fish for bull trout. I'll probably film a couple videos for the other channel as well. So I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to bull trout. So not sure if there will be success there, but I can guarantee that I'll be able to catch some cutthroat. West Slope cutthroat are also on my list as they are eager dry fly eaters. And in my mind, although I've never fished for them, it sounds similar to brook trout to me, are very opportunistic and happen to be surface oriented. So looking forward to that trip. I probably won't catch a bull trout bigger than that steelhead, but hey, you never know. The Fly Slinger asks, what is my favorite fly fishing media? I'm assuming you mean videos and stuff. Well, I don't actually watch a whole lot of fly tying content. The content that I do consume is often YouTube oriented, how to improve channels, business oriented, mostly because I didn't have much experience in creating a business and now I've kind of dove headfirst into it. But I do consume some, particularly on long road trips. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I've kind of grown out of music a little bit. I loved music in my teenage years, and now whenever I get in a vehicle, I just like to listen to a podcast for some reason. But there's two people I really like. First of all, Tom Rosenbauer. If you don't know who that is, he's kind of the face of Orvis, just a wealth of knowledge, and he has a podcast that you could look up. I'm trying to remember the name, the Orvis Fly Fishing Podcast with Tom Rosenbauer or something like that. And he does something similar to what I do. Usually he answers questions, which is where I got this idea. And then he'll go into a specific topic. So if you like fly fishing podcasts, I only have 4 up. He's got hundreds. So you can listen to those all day long. And he really has great guests that appear on the channel and has had a ton of fly fishing experience. So would definitely recommend that one. The other one I like is Anchored with April Vokey. Same thing goes for her. She has a lot of experience. Her setup is a little different, whereas she just, I think, mostly invites a guest on the channel. She really enjoys history, so oftentimes she's bringing some older people on the channel talking about their past with fly fishing, how they got into it, and also does some tips and tricks and stuff like that. So that's another great one to listen to. Yeah, those are the 2 fly fishing podcasts. As far as video goes, I don't really consume much at all, but every now and then I do put on Wildfly Productions. He produces incredible content and would highly suggest checking out his YouTube channel. But yeah, that's pretty much all I do. I read some magazines. But yeah, the next question is from a name I can't read. What fly materials should a beginner fly tyer buy? Yeah, that is a good question. So I feel like whenever you get into fly tying, this is a common question that comes up because there's so many things out there. But the best advice I can give you is find a pattern that you want to tie. Let's say it's a woolly bugger. And go out and buy all the materials you need to tie that single pattern in 1 or 2 colors. Maybe just stick with one. And what'll happen is over time, as you select these new patterns, you start to build up the materials that you have. And by the time you go for the 3rd pattern, you're going to realize, oh, I already have this and this. And so you begin to build up that collection. Now, if I were to go on someone else's video and look at their flies, I'll realize, all right, I have everything I need, mostly because I have a huge collection. But you might say, oh, I'm missing this. And you can just pick up that single item. So it gets easier as you go, and this will help you learn the materials. And you can also start to learn how to swap things out. So maybe I don't have a mallard flank, for example, but hey, I just shot a wood duck the other day and I've got plenty of wood duck flanks. Same thing, just a slightly different shade. And if you ask me, wood duck's a little bit nicer. So yeah, that's probably the best way to go about it. Pick one pattern at a time, 1 or 2, and just get what you need. Over time, you'll build up that collection, and it won't feel like as big of an investment at first. Kevin Marca asked, what is the most difficult pattern to tie? That would probably have to go to not a pattern in particular, but any Atlantic salmon pattern, or any decorative Atlantic salmon pattern, actually. Those can be extremely intricate, often use rare materials, and people will work on a single fly for weeks. You can fish with them, but a lot of times now they're not necessarily recognized as a fly you're going to use, but just a beautiful form of art. I have tied Atlantic salmon flies, but practical ones, like the bombers or the green butt. Things that you actually use. It doesn't take all that long and is just as simple as other flies. But those decorative Atlantic salmon flies, those are something. I've only tied a couple of them, and it's still not something I necessarily have the patience for, but maybe I'll get into it one day. But what I would love to do is set up a second bench for art projects. I have my practical vise, but if I have a whole separate bench where I can leave a single fly in place for weeks at a time and just work on it here and there, because the whole idea is perfection. And I'm not the biggest fan of perfection. It's why I talk about a nice buggy look. And a buggy look, to me, kind of means intentional imperfections. Fish don't care, and sometimes those imperfections can actually be useful, particularly for movement or just imitating nature itself, which isn't always perfect. You don't need a bug to look exactly the same every time. And having a little messy fly, or as I like to call it, buggy fly, is a good thing. Anyway, that I'm kind of getting off topic, but yeah, I'd like to get into that more one day, and maybe I'll set up a second bench and do some extremely long videos on creating a work of art that you could hang up on a wall versus actually fish. Redox Alchemist asks, advice to someone that has never tied before and wants to start. So I get a lot of these questions, but I want to definitely continue answering them. So the easiest way to start is to not overthink it. Go buy yourself a cheap vise. As I mentioned before, pick one pattern and buy the materials you need to tie that, and just start. Don't go overboard. Don't overthink it. Your total investment in the tools, the vise, and the pattern you buy should easily be under $100. Don't invest more than that to start, because fly tying is not for everyone. It does take a lot of patience, and there's plenty of people who don't find that they enjoy it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But just start cheap, give it a try, and if you don't like it, pass it on to someone else who's thinking about trying it. And that's what I did with my cheap setup. So I have a couple cheap setups for teaching people, but whenever I find someone that I know that wants to try it out, I just simply give them a vise. And you might even ask a buddy, if you know who ties, be like, hey, do you mind if I try this out? And they'll likely even have a cheap one that they could give you or loan you for a short period of time. So yeah, that's the best way to do it. Just start. Don't overthink it. And that's just not fly tying. That's like life advice. Kind of like I did with this podcast. I was overthinking the topic and decided, what, we don't need a topic today, and just started. It might not be my best podcast in the world, but it's better than nothing. Jack asks, what are the benefits to jig hooks? Yeah, I really like jig hooks, and I don't even Euro nymph. So even if it's under an indicator, I think it's quite useful because it turns your hook upside down. And now it's not going to get stuck on the bottom as much. It's kind of going to bounce off of objects in theory. And based on my experience, I do find they get hooked up to the bottom less. So that's one thing that's quite useful. In addition, they tend to be better built hooks. They usually have more bend to them that pins fish extremely well. They often don't have barbs as well, which I personally like. I don't think it makes that big a difference, especially with how these hooks are built. They really do pin fish well. All you got to do is keep pressure. Those are the major things that I can think of. They're better quality hooks. They tend not to get hooked up at the bottom as much. And they're almost all made barbless. Yeah, I guess those are the major differences that I can think of at the moment. There's probably a few others, but Tyler, the fly tire, I like that name, asks, in your opinion, what is the coolest species to target on the fly? Yeah, that's tough. There's a lot of cool species out there that are very high on my bucket list, but I'm going to pause for a minute and think about that one. What I came up with is pretty much any species that'll take a dry fly. I just think that's the purest and the coolest way to fly fish. But another thing that came to mind was tarpon. Yeah, I just think that's a really cool one to target. I haven't done it yet, but I do look forward to that one day. That said, there's all kinds of cool species out there. I mean, muskie are cool to target on the fly. I saw someone catch an arapaima somewhere the other day on my Instagram. That's extremely cool and time consuming, I can imagine. So congrats to that guy. So those are the ones that come to my mind. But pretty much targeting any species on the fly is pretty cool to me. And that's one of the reasons I like fly fishing. Not necessarily for the species itself, but it just adds a little bit extra struggle to fishing itself. And for some reason, I enjoy that. Haas Style Fishing asks, how to become an excellent fly tire machine like yourself? Well, I guess time is really the only answer to that. Some people have a better natural ability for fly tying than others, but really it's just dedicating your time to learning about the hobby and doing it. The more you do it, the more experience you'll have and the better you'll become. And that is more or less the only way to get good at anything. It's just practice, and over time, you become a little bit better each time. I think I'm a decent fly tyer, but there's still plenty of room for me to grow. Now I'm excited to take this on full time, and who knows where I'll be in 10, 20, 30 years. So yeah, just keep at it and you'll improve every time. But remember, in the end, the fish don't care what our flies look like. So as long as you can tie a durable fly, you're doing just fine. And that is all the questions I have for today. If I didn't get your question, or sometimes I do miss them, feel free to repost it and I'll go through the comment section of this video. I'll be looking for your guys' questions for the next one. And if you have a topic suggestion, I guess I could really use it. I'll put some more thought into deciding on a few, but I just wanted to get this video out there. So for those of you who actually made it this far in the video, thank you for listening. You have the longest attention span of pretty much all of my viewers. I know this wasn't necessarily the most interesting podcast I could have done, but I want to inform you guys of the future of these channels and just get myself used to doing these podcasts again. I'd like to make this at least a weekly, if not bi-weekly thing. So look forward to that. I will come up with some better topics for the future and try to get some guests on here. Anyway, thank you all so much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed today's video, and I will see you in the next one.